Hi, this is Judy from Bungalow Quilting and Yarn, and I had done a previous video talking about the parts of a pattern and how we read a pattern. Today we're going to talk about how to lay out a pattern, and this is a video for beginners, somebody that wants to sew a garment and maybe has felt intimidated by the pattern and the process of laying out a pattern and cutting it. So stay tuned, and I'm going to show you how to a beginner video on how to cut fabric for a garment using a pattern. Okay, so I have this pattern out, and I think we talked about this same pattern on a different video, but it's a little butterick pattern, it's a little dress, and I've decided that I'm going to make view C here for my granddaughter. So this is view C, and so when you open the pattern, there are instructions like this on regular paper that you unfold, and then the pattern pieces are separate from these instructions. So I've decided I was going to make view C. So I'm going to find view C on the sketch part of the pattern. And then underneath there's a drawing of the different pattern pieces. Now keep in mind that this might be different if you did download a PDF pattern from the internet. Right now I'm just talking about a pattern that's from the big three pattern companies, one that's kind of been in use for many, many, many years. And so we're gonna just talk about this type of pattern today. So there's a description of all the different pieces right here that are included in the pattern. So when you open out this brown sheet, multiple sheets, there's going to be all these different pieces. And so how do you know, if you're not an experienced seamstress, how do you know which one of these pieces are going to make view C? These are for the pants, these are for the dress, this is a sleeve, but I know that because I've been doing this for so long. But this is not something anybody is born with. And so we're going to go through how you're going to determine which pieces you're going to cut. Okay, so what you're going to do then is find, as you move down the sheet of paper, you go ahead and look ahead. As you move down, you're going to see that they give you some fabric cutting layout ideas. We're not going to necessarily reference those because many, many times I don't follow those, and I think most people don't. But I'm going to show you some tips on how to lay out the pattern so that you do end up with enough material and you're not shorting yourself. But let's look at how do we decide on here what pattern pieces do we need for view C. So here it'll say top A, and they also have it in other languages. Sometimes it's French. Top B requires these pieces. And then what we want is the dress. We want dress C. So of course we have 45-inch wide fabric. We talked about 45 inches versus 60-inch fabric. And this is a layout diagram of how you're going to lay it out. But the other thing that the layout diagram is going to show you is which pieces you're going to need. So we're going to need piece number 4, number 5, and number 6. So those are the 3 pieces that you're going to need for that. Let's go over here and look at the pants. Let's say you were going to sew the pants. So the pants you would need piece number 9, piece number 10, and then here is a 2 and a 3 right here and right here. So you're going to need those 2 pieces. When you're doing this, when you're looking at this, I want you to cross-reference these pieces here so that you can see what shape they are. It makes it a little easier when you look at this, look at both of those things, so that when you do open the pattern out and start to cut out the pieces, you're going to be already familiar with what shape you're going to be looking for. So if I wanted to make the dress and I need piece 4, 5, and 6, I'm going to look to see what shape they are, and I'm going to look over here. Yep, piece 6 looks like that. Yeah, that's the piece I'm going to be looking for when I open out that pattern piece. So when we open out this thing of lots of brown tissue paper, lots of big pieces, we're looking for pieces number 4, 5, and 6. And this is how they're going to look, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so you can see that I've opened out my brown piece of tissue paper. And here are the pieces. Here is 4, here is 5, and here is 6. And do they look like the same shapes that we saw on the instructions? Yes, they do. So I'm pretty confident that I can go ahead and cut these out of the paper. Now this is tissue paper. PDF download patterns and like Quick Sew, that company, those patterns come on a heavier paper, almost like a piece of paper that you'd put in a copier or a printer. And if it's a PDF download, it is paper that you're putting in a copier or a printer. So then when you cut these pattern pieces apart, do not use your good sewing shears. Use a cheap, crummy pair of paper scissors. But with this tissue paper, this actually can be used, you can use your sewing shears for cutting out something lightweight like this tissue paper. And when you cut it, you're just going to cut well around the outside. Don't cut right on those lines. Cut around the outside of that pattern. Because if you're sitting here trying with this giant piece of paper to cut exactly on that line, number one, it's going to take you forever. Number two, you're going to cut off of it and cut into the pattern. So you want to give yourself some generous room around that pattern while you're cutting it. So you're just cutting them apart from each other. And here's a chunk of tissue paper. I'm going to cut that off as well. But remember, I'm staying well outside those lines of that pattern. Now, some people will go so far as to save money. They'll buy regular tissue paper and then they'll lay it down on top of this piece and they'll trace it. And that's not a bad idea if you're a mom and you've got multiple children. Say you've got 3 girls and you're sewing dresses for them, and one's a size 2, one's a size 3, and one's a size 4. People will actually take a piece of tissue paper and cover this with tissue paper and trace the size that they want onto the tissue paper so that they're not cutting into that one size, and then that renders this pattern as a one-use pattern for a size 2 or a size 3, whatever size you've chosen to cut on. And so that is one option, but for now we're just going to do where we use the pattern as it is and we cut. So now I have my pattern pieces cut around the outside, giving myself a lot of room, like I said before, generous room so that when I actually cut it, I'm not, missing any corners or anything like that. And then there's these other pieces that I'm not going to use for this dress. This is the shorts and pants pattern, so I'm not going to use this. And then there's the top, the little girl's top. I'm not going to use these, so I'm going to fold these back up, feel comfortable folding these back up because I'm not going to use these, and we're going to put these back into the envelope. Okay, so I just want to mention one other thing. Here, there's another piece. It's called piece number 7, and it is a guide for elastic, all right? And you'll see these in patterns. They'll have a guide for how long the elastic should be. So this is for view B and for view C. And like I said, we are doing view C. And where do we see the elastic? We see it up here on the neckline. So if you're not sure when you are making this for someone and you don't have the child readily there and available to check a size and how long you want that elastic to be, then this is a guideline. So you would make the elastic the length of that pattern piece. Sometimes patterns will also have a guideline for buttonholes. If you're doing a shirt that is a button-down shirt, it might have a guide made out of the tissue paper with the spots on it marked for where the buttonholes should be. So there are some pieces in here that you might think don't make any sense, but just look at them and read them, and then it'll make it clear. Here very clearly it says guide for elastic. So that's also something to keep in mind. Okay, so now we've got our pieces cut. We've got number 6, not size, we've got number 6, we've got number 4, and we've got number 5. So those are our 3 pattern pieces. And within each pattern piece, we were talking about this before, there are multiple sizes. There is a size 2, a size 3, a size 4, and a size 5. Now, all these sizes are nested within this one piece. This is the back piece, okay? This is the piece for the back of the dress. And there was a time not that long ago, I'd say back in the 70s, where they didn't nest these. If you bought a pattern and the pattern said on the front that there was size 2, 3, 4, and 5 inside this pattern, you actually would have 4 of this piece in the tissue. So you had 4 of piece number 5. You'd have 1 for size 2, 1 for size 3, 1 for size 4, and 1 for size 5. Well, there were definite advantages to that, and the advantage being that if the child grew and you had made a size 2 last time, that pattern was still good for 4 more sizes of that dress. But with this, if you commit yourself to cutting the 2 or the 3, you're not going to be able to use that pattern and go back and then cut a 4. And you're probably not even going to be able to reuse it to cut a size 2 because there are some spots in which the lines cross in a funny kind of way, and you'll see that later as you're working with more patterns. So it really renders it as a one-time use pattern, or at least one time within that size. If I decided to make, 3 or 4 dresses all of the same size, that would be fine, but if the child grew, you were kind of stuck having to go buy a new pattern. So the alternative to that would be then that you would take a piece of tissue paper and you could trace this. You could trace a size 2 with your piece of tissue paper and then use that piece that you traced and leave this pattern intact. It's kind of like when people buy CDs for a soundtrack or something and then they take it home and they copy it onto another disc and then put the original one away so that they can actually put the one that they've copied into their car and take it around so that it doesn't get all scratched. That's kind of the concept with this, is that you're keeping this intact original pattern somewhere on file in your house and you can use it again later. So you're going to have to take a really close look at these patterns when you first take it out, all right? It's just going to look like a whole bunch of lines to you and it's going to look kind of intimidating and maybe a little scary. So if I wanted to cut out a size 2, you can see that you're going to follow the lines that look like this. If you're going to cut out a size 4, they have much bigger lines. The dashes are longer. If you're going to do a size 5, it's a solid line. So the advantage to this too is that if this were a pair of pants and you had maybe you were making it for a little guy that had a really skinny waistline or and really chunky legs, you might want to cut the pattern wider for the legs and then smaller for the waist. So you might want to make them a size 2 for the waist and maybe a 3 for the legs. And there are ways to do that. And that's kind of nice how they're all nested within one pattern because, you know, maybe I wanted to make her a size 2 up here and maybe she was a really chubby little girl. And so you might start cutting with your scissors a little further over here and then go into the size 4 for around the midsection of the pattern. Okay, so we've covered the sizes here. You're also going to see things like these are called notches. And when I get to the point where I'm actually cutting this pattern out, we'll talk about these. But these are important because the notch here is going to correspond with the notch on the sleeve. This is where the sleeve gets sewn in. And so the notch here will correspond with a notch on the sleeve. And when you're sewing it together, that's important because that notch here is going to match with that notch on the sleeve so that you know where to make them match. They're going to be little match points. This up here says fold line. You're going to be using that fold line. That's where you're going to fold it over to put the elastic in. So when you're looking at the pattern piece like this, take a look at it. So this says back, this one says front. Take a look at it and kind of compare it to what's going on in the picture. So here's the front of the dress, all right? And when it says fold line, you can see that it's up here near the neckline. So you can guess that, you know, you're going to fold that over to put the elastic in, all right? And it helps to, again, look on your drawings on the back of the pattern here. Gives you a much more accurate idea because you don't have to try to see something through the busy print on the front. So you've always got that to reference. Okay, so then you're going to go over here and you see here it says center back on fold. This means that when you lay this pattern piece on, it's going to have to be laid on a fold. You can't lay it on a piece of fabric like this where there's no fold. There's just 2 edges. Let's see. See that? You're not going to lay it along this edge here because this is not a fold. Here, this is a fold. So that's where you would lay something like that. But we'll get into that more when we're doing the layout. Here it says lengthen or shorten here. There's going to also be an option to lengthen or shorten it down here if you're going to make a shirt. So this is where you would cut it off if you were going to make that little shirt. See, it says cut here for B. And that means you're going to cut it off for view B right there. So here's view B. So that's the cutting edge for view B. It would be right here. Down here, it says lengthen or shorten here as well. So if you wanted to make it shorter at the hemline, this is the bottom of the dress. See, this is the top, this is where the sleeve goes, and here is the bottom. So if you wanted to make it shorter at the hemline, here is where you would make it shorter. If you wanted to make it shorter because somebody was short-waisted, this is where you would make it shorter. And I'm going to show you how that gets done. Here is your natural waistline, and we talked about that when we were talking about sizing a pattern. Where was somebody's actual waistline? Where were their hips? Where was their sleeve measurement? That kind of thing. If that's on a previous video, that's the natural waistline. Now here it gives you, remember we talked about, there was that indigo junction pattern in the previous video, and it gave the actual widths and the lengths of the garment when it was done. This is not the width and the length of the person or the size. This is the width and the length of the garment when it's done. That's what that's about. Same thing down here, the width and the length of the garment down here. All right. So again, this is reiterated here, cut one, unfold. That's a pretty important point. You don't want to miss that because you're only going to cut one of this. It'll be one piece, but it's on a fold. So when you open it out, that means you're going to have a piece that's going to open out, as opposed to piece number 4. Oh, actually, this one says cut one, unfold. But if this were something with a zipper, you would not be cutting this on a fold. You would be cutting this here on the edge because there would be a seam here if there were a zipper. But this does not have a zipper. This is just a pull over your head kind of dress. And so this one also gets put on a fold. The sleeve here, you're going to cut 2 because obviously you need 2 sleeves. So that means you're doubling your fabric, you're doubling your thickness. You're going to need 2 sleeves. So that's how that one's going to work. And then this here is for the grain line. This is where you measure the grain line of the fabric. And we'll talk about that as we're laying it out too. These here do not have a grain line because you're putting it on a fold. And again, that will become clearer when we're laying it onto the fabric and pinning it and cutting it. We're going to talk about that feature. Okay, so now we're going to do the actual laying and pinning of the pattern and the cutting. Now, we talked about widths of fabric before, and I want to explain once again that the width of fabric, the length of the fabric is this direction. So this is called a selvage edge. This is a selvage edge. This is an edge that is bound tightly so that there is no fraying here and here. So between the selvages, from there to that end there, that's where you measure your width of fabric. Your length is along here. So if I want 3 yards of fabric, I'm going to measure 3 yards along the selvage. 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And this is 1 yard of fabric. As you can see, 1 yard that is 44 inches or 45 inches wide. Okay, so fabric, if it's not a knit, if it's a weave, this is a woven. This is not a knit. You can see the tiny little fibers in here. They're going this direction and this direction. They're cross-hatched. Okay, that's how your bed sheets are. That's how, you know, other things that, like a blouse that you buy or a men's cotton shirt, whatever. The fabric is cross-weaved like this and like this if it's not a knit. A knit would be like a t-shirt, and this is not a knit. So what's important about that? Why is that important? Because your fibers you have going this direction and this direction. When the fabric is woven on a loom, one way is going to be stretchier than another. So along the selvage this way along the selvage is less stretchy than between the selvages. This is always going to give more stretch. So you kind of want to keep that into consideration if you're cutting something where it's a question as to whether or not you need a little more stretch. If I were going to cut a sleeve, I would never cut a sleeve this way with the top of the sleeve being here and the cuff being down here. I would cut it this way across the width of the sleeve because I'd want a little more stretch, okay? It's just a little more give. But conversely, if you are a quilter and you want something not to stretch like a border, you're going to try to cut that along this way because you don't want stretch. You don't want it to stretch, and this way is going to give you more stretch. The other thing that's going to give you more stretch is, remember I said they go this way and they go this way. They're cross-hatched. If you go on a diagonal, if you cut something on a diagonal, you're going to have a whole heck of a lot of stretch. That gives a lot of stretch to the fabric. And that means that if you stretch it too much, you can stretch the piece right out of shape, and it won't be the right shape anymore if you get a lot of stretch. So that's important to know. All right, so when I cut this out, I'm going to take a look. I'm always going to cut my big pieces first. I'm always going to cut my bigger pieces first, with the thought in mind that if I'm running low on fabric, I probably, with my smaller pieces, I'm going to be able to squeeze them in somewhere along the line, along the way. And also, you know, buy enough fabric to begin with. I always buy what the pattern says and then just a little bit more, just in case you decide that you've made a mistake, you've cut something wrong and you need to cut something else, or you're going to end up having to go back to the store and risk the fact that you're not going to find that same fabric again. so these are my bigger pieces, and we know we have to cut them on a fold. So that means I can't lay them here along this edge because that's not a fold, that's an open edge there. This is the folded edge right here. See that? That's the folded edge. But I also know that I'm not going to, notice how I have this opened out. When I bought the fabric, it came like this. It came rolled on a bolt, and it came folded exactly in half like that. Now, am I gonna go then and find the fold and put my pattern piece right on that fold like this and cut? Well, no, because that leaves 2 pieces of fabric that are cut here left over, and it's very wasteful. As opposed to if you take your fabric and you open it out and you make your fold only as wide as what that pattern piece is, like this, okay? And then you've got all this over here left so that you're not wasting fabric. All right, so I'm going to fold this just about to the same width as this. So if I'm going to make a size 3, I know that I have to have it at least as wide as where the size 3 is. And the size 3 ends right here, and then the fold of it is over here. So is this piece big enough right here? Yes, it is. So I cannot now just put this on the fold and go pin, and I'm going to explain about that. Remember how we said if something is cut on the diagonal, you're going to have more stretch. And the other thing too is people will come in and they'll say, I don't sew garments because I just can't get it to hang right. Well, let's say I was going to put my pattern piece down and it was like this, and I didn't go to measure it accurately, or I didn't, I just laid it like this and I put this on the fold. Well, what's going to happen? This basically then is going to be cut on the bias, and you're going to have all this stretch, and your garment is not going to hang right at all. It's going to be a mess. So what you have to do when you do this is, now we decided that this was the right amount of room for my fabric, or my pattern. So here's the fold. Here's where the size 3 goes. Okay, so we know we've got enough room for my pattern piece. Now I'm going to measure from here to here, okay? That is, I'll keep it as straight as you can. Try not to do this or do this. Keep it as straight as you can. 10 1/4. All right, so then I'm gonna go here, 10 1/4, and I'm gonna go up here, 10 1/4. So we're good. We're good all the way across here. We know that the distance from here to here is the same as the distance from here to here. So now I can safely put my pattern piece on that fabric like it is. Move that up. And now I can pin. And I don't have to, I can start way down here so that I'm not, again, not wasting fabric because I'm cutting a size 3. So I can put it down here, and now I can start pinning. When you pin, you want to pin inside far enough that you're not going to hit it with your scissors. Now, while that seems kind of like a ridiculous thing to say, actually it's not. You'd be surprised the number of people that pin so close to that outside edge that they actually run into that pin with their scissors. I've seen it a number of times. Now, this is getting confusing up here. I've got fold lines and I've got size lines. I've got all kinds of lines up here. So now comes the time where you have to look really closely and kind of count backwards. So here it says fold line view 2. So that's the fold line for view 2. Here's actually the cutting line for view 2. See that? Because remember, the cutting line was that short little punctuated line. There's that short little punctuated line for view 2, so you know that's where you're going to cut if you're doing, or not view, I keep saying view, I mean size. This is size 2. Here's the line, the cutting line for size 2. This is the fold line for size 2, okay? Now we're going to, what we wanted to cut was a size 3. Here, this says fold line 3. You could easily mistake that for the cutting line for size 3. So you've got to look at this very carefully. There's no other way to tell you, there's no other trick other than looking at it carefully. So let's go back and look at what size 3, what the cutting line looks like. It's a long dash, a short dash, a long dash, a short dash. So let's find that. There's the long dash, the short dash, long dash, short dash. There's where I'm going to cut. That's where I'm going to cut for size 3. So I'm going to put my pin in. So this requires some concentration. You have to really look and see what you're doing. All right, so then we're going to get to around here, which is the sleeve opening. I'm going to put our pins in all the way down. Now this line here says lengthen or shorten here. I'm going to take my other pattern piece and show you what that means because it's not already anchored to my fabric. Let's say somebody was very short-waisted, or let's say this was a pant leg and you wanted to shorten the pant leg without changing the shape. If I wanted to shorten the waist in here without changing the actual shape of the pattern, you can fold it right there on where it says lengthen or shorten. And let's say you wanted to shorten it up by 1 inch. You're going to shorten it up like this so that from here to here measures 1/2 inch because that's 2 thicknesses and that will equal 1 inch. All right, so you're going to approximately measure with your measuring tape. See if you've just about got 1/2 inch. Yeah, I've got more than 1/2 inch. So I'm going to move it down. And then I would recommend not using tape because if you use tape and then you go back when the child has grown, maybe they've stayed really, really skinny, but they've gotten really lengthy, then you can open that out again and make the same pattern. Okay, so then I would shorten it up by using pins here. What if you wanted to make it longer? What if you wanted to do this and make it longer? You'd cut on this line and then you'd just move that piece down. And you might add a strip of tissue paper or something in there and then tape it. But that's how you actually make something longer or shorter without changing the overall shape of that pattern. Okay, so let's finish pinning this. And this is about how close together your pins should be. They shouldn't be much further apart than that, and you shouldn't need many more than that. So here, let's go down here again and look. Here's the hemline for view 2, or size 2, I'm sorry. And here's the hemline for size 3. So we're gonna put our pin in, let's put it in there, right about there. Okay. Okay, now we're gonna start cutting, and I know that that seems a little scary, but we're gonna cut. Now you're gonna see these little circles here, and there are reasons for those little circles. And most of the time it's for like, this is where you're going to leave the seam open so that you can thread your elastic through or that kind of thing. It will come into play when you're reading the instructions. They will say what happens at that circle. So you might wanna take a piece of chalk or something and make a little mark where that circle is. Now we're gonna get down to the notches. Remember how we talked about the notches when we were talking about describing the different parts of a pattern? This is how notches get cut. So you stop cutting, like right there, you make your snip. And then you make a little, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but you make a little half diamond or a little triangle right where the notch is, and then you keep going. And you have to do that. Do not cut those notches off. Don't. It's one of the biggest mistakes you can make to cut those off because you have to have a way of knowing where that sleeve is supposed to fit. The sleeve is going to have to fit in there, so those notches are a very necessary part of the pattern. Sometimes they're double like this. See that? There's 2 of them here. That's important too. So this is how you cut a double notch. You go up, you go across, and you go down. So it has a flat top, it has a plateau. It doesn't have a peak, it has a plateau. And that comes into play sometimes when you're trying to delineate what's the front and what's the back. So we're gonna keep cutting here. Oh, somehow I got off of the size 3. I did. I started cutting a size. See how easy that happens? I went from the size 3 over to the size 4. Now, actually I'm gonna have to recut that because I want a size 3. But this just goes to show you how there's an advantage to having multiple sizes in a pattern, because if somebody was a little maybe chubbier along here but not so chubby up here, you could actually alter that. What I would do then, so that the sleeve still fit, if I was doing a size 3 sleeve, would be that I would gradually start here and cut over a little bit and make it wider. But that's not the case. I do want a size 3. So I'm gonna go back and look where my size 3 line was. So actually it's kind of advantageous that that happened because I want you to see how very carefully you have to pay attention to what you're doing. Okay, so we're back on track. We're back to cutting a size 3. And this is what those little arrows are for too. See, and that's how I noticed that I was not on it. It says 3, there's a little arrow to show you where the line is. And they'll have those from time to time, and it's a good thing they have those from time to time because it keeps you definitely on track. The other thing I want to mention is that this fabric was an all over print. What do we mean by all over print? Look at these bunnies. There's one bunny where its head's down, one bunny where the head is up, one to the side, one upside down halfway. So it's an all over. They're tossed on the fabric. It's not a one-way print. I don't need to worry that the animals are directional. If this were bunnies where the top of the bunny was here, the bottom of the bunny was here, well then the top of my pattern better be here and the bottom be here because you don't want, it's directional. You don't want the rabbits to be going upside down on your dress. So always keep in mind if a fabric is directional. Now it's okay to come back over here. Notice I left this spot and I came over here because rather than to try to turn my arm this way to cut, I'm coming over here and I'm going to cut till I reach that side, which is already cut. I'm going to do the exact same thing for this piece over here that I've got pinned, and I'm going to cut that. Okay, so now the last piece we have left is the sleeve. We've got this much fabric left. It's more than enough fabric, but that doesn't mean we want to waste it. So we're going to lay our sleeve like this up toward the edge of the fabric so that we've got all this fabric left over for scraps that you can use someday to make a quilt. So we've got the sleeve piece, and we know that both pieces, we need 2 sleeves. You definitely need 2 sleeves. And we're going to go this direction with it because sleeves should have a little more stretch, right? Rather than going this direction with it, although you could do that. It's for a little kid, so it's probably not as essential, but we're going to do it this way so that there's a little more stretch. Because this is the part that's going to be on the top, this is the bottom hem of the sleeve, and this is the part that's going around your arm, this whole thing here. So we're going to have to make sure that the fabric is going to accommodate that pattern piece. So we're going to make it 2 pieces like this, wide enough. Okay, so that's going to accommodate my pattern piece. But can we just start cutting now? No, we can't. We have to make sure that we measure from the fold to the selvage once again. So it's 17 and almost, these are 16ths of an inch marked on here. So it's 1/16 short of a half. So that's 7/16. And yep, it's exact. Now if it were not, whoops. Yep, if it were not, we'd have to adjust that. So now the sleeve is not getting put on a fold like the other ones were. We didn't need to measure anything more after we did that because we just placed those on the fold. This is not getting placed on a fold because we need 2 sleeves here that are going to have to be separate from each other. So what if we had it like this? That'd be cattywampus. That would not be straight. Well, you could eyeball it and you could pin it just like that, but let's be sure that we actually have it straight. And that's what this line is for. That is what the grain line is for. When it talks about a grain line, that means that this should be on the straight of grain. When you hear the word straight of grain, they're talking about this process. They're talking about measuring from this point to make sure that you're actually straight. So we're going to go from that line right there. We're going to put 0 on that line, and we're going to go here, and that's 5 3/4. And I'm actually going to go so far as to put a pin there so that that doesn't shift. Oops, see how it shifts so easily? Okay, so 5 3/4. I'm going to put my pin in there to hold it. And then we're going to go down to this end of that little line. And there's 5 3/4. So we do have, not only is this straight from here to here and here to here, but now this pattern is straight on that piece. We don't have to worry that it's laying cattywampus and that we're going to end up with something that hangs funny or stretches funny. Okay, now we will continue to pin this piece. Now, are there any other markings on here that we need to talk about? Well, there are those circles. See that? Circles. And sometimes you're going to match circles on the sleeves with circles on the dress pattern. We have, once again, we have notches here. See how those are double notches there and a single notch here? Let's look at this. This says back, there's a double notch. This says front, and that's a single notch. And you are going to find that to be fairly consistent across every type of pattern that you use. That the double notches, whether it's the crotch of the pants or the sleeve on a shirt or a dress, the double notch generally indicates that that's the back, and the single notch generally designates that that's the front. So when you go to match those up, you'll know which sleeve is which, depending on whether this is in the back or not. If this is in the back, then that's the right sleeve. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and cut it just like we cut the dress, and then we'll have our pattern completely cut out. Here's our hem. This stays the same for all the sizes. And there's a fold line. You can see it says fold line on there, and that's where we're going to fold it over when we put our elastic casing in. Okay, now we're going to go up here and find size 3. Size 3 was the short, long, short, long. This gets very dicey on sleeves because they're so close together. There's my notch. I'm gonna go up, make a peak, down. There's my size 3. Be very careful. See how close those run together? They run very close together. And up here again, we've got that issue because the elastic's gonna be in here as to what is a fold line and what is a cutting line. First of all, a fold line is always going to be solid, and the cutting lines are punctuated. Okay, so we're going to cut where it's punctuated. Long, short, long, short. And try to ignore the fact that we've got those solid fold lines in there. You got to look very carefully when you're cutting the sleeve as to where are you cutting. And I don't want to make anybody too nervous or panicked and think, oh my gosh, it's impossible. I'm just never going to be able to do this. Don't worry. You can do this. And the only thing we didn't touch on was you can always make a muslin mock-up if you're afraid and you've got an expensive piece of fabric and you don't want to cut your expensive piece of fabric first. Buy some cheap muslin, make the dress out of cheap muslin first. Find out how you like it, how it fits before you cut into that expensive fabric. Okay, so now we've got all of them cut. We've got number 4, 5, and 6 of our pattern pieces all cut down to a size 3. And look at all the fabric we have left over. We're gonna save that to make a quilt. Yay!